Well, I'm joined today by Dr. Elizabeth MacTavish. Dr. MacTavish is an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, where she works with teacher education, particularly in the field of STEM, but she's also has experience in K through 12 education. So I thought this would be an excellent chance to talk to someone who's taught in the classroom and now is training teachers to go into the classroom about some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, and some of the trends that are showing up in higher education in terms of preparing folks for teaching careers. Welcome, Dr. MacTavish.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm glad I have an opportunity to speak about my experiences, both in the classroom and what I'm currently doing at UT. So thank you.
Well, let's just get a disclaimer out of the way very quickly. Neither Dr. MacTavish nor myself are speaking on behalf of our employers. We're speaking as individuals who have some experience in teacher education and are interested in what is coming next. So the first question is always, can you tell me about a teacher that had a really important impact on your life, and what made that experience of that teacher so good for you?
So I really have two. And the first one is from the student perspective. When I was an eighth grade student in Northeast Tennessee, I had a fantastic science teacher. And I think a lot of what made him so great in my eyes was his investment in us as people. Of course, he taught science and stuck with the curriculum, but he always made an effort to find out what was going on in our lives and talk to us. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was that he knew I had an interest in science and STEM. He helped me really kind of navigate what were my career options, considering the things I was looking at. And one of them, which didn't come to fruition, but life has worked out fine, was I wanted to go into the Air Force Academy. And so I was clueless on how to even go about navigating that. And so he really helped me make the right phone calls. At that time, there was no email. So making phone calls and reaching out to people. And in the end, he helped me get a congressional appointment from our Tennessee senator, who was Al Gore at the time, and just spent a lot of time invested in who I was and what I wanted to be. And that was not just for me. I saw him do that with everybody else that walked through his door. And so as life had it, I went down different pathways and actually received my undergraduate at UT and decided to go into teaching. And he was the model that I used through everything I did. Was students first, students as people first. And so I owe him a debt of gratitude. My other example, because I said I had two, was my first year teaching. And I was placed on a team of teachers who had a collective 130 years of experience. And when I came in as a young teacher, I made that number go down considerably. But they were happy to have me. And from day one, they never treated me as a novice teacher. I came in, they valued the experiences that I had. They involved me in conversations, and the culture that they created within our team and with our students made me a better teacher. And so they really did a great job of modeling that. So I think every new teacher should be so fortunate to be placed with great mentors and veteran teachers who really care about kids. So I think both of those two experiences, both as a new teacher and as a student myself, really shaped who I became in the classroom as a K-12 teacher.
Well, thank you for that. I'm really struck by that second story as well, that teaching is kind of a team sport in a lot of ways. And we might come back to a question about sort of the context in which we're asking people to teach these days. But I think, can you give us a really brief overview of what the process looks like for someone who wants to pursue a professional career in teaching in the state of Tennessee? What are the steps? Where's the gatekeeping taking place, and what's the commitment look like?
And I'll talk a little bit about just my experiences with the university I work with, but most of our students come in and major in something other than teaching. We have a few pathways, I'll call them, into the classroom that students would come to us from day one. Our special ed is an example. Our elementary ed, that's a brand new program where they can start with us. And by day one, I mean when they step on campus as freshmen or sophomore or whenever they bridge over to us. Otherwise, most students receive an undergraduate degree in something other than teaching, and their teaching degree is a minor. And a lot of times we won't meet them in that process until late into their sophomore or early into their junior year. And they actually apply for candidacy in our teacher ed program. So it's not as simple as just saying, I want to be a teacher, and they get to walk right in. We do interview them. We do vet them in terms of, what is your motivation to teach? We have a responsibility, and I would say every educator prep program feels this way. We have a responsibility of putting future teachers in the classroom who are invested in students. And so, we kind of go through that application process with them. We do interview them, and usually that is kind of parsed out to the licensure areas themselves. So I work in STEM. So any student that would want to become a science or a math teacher, I could be part of that interview process. If they want to do art or social sciences, they would go to some of our other faculty who work in those areas. And then once they're granted admission, there are certain courses that they're required to take as part of their program of study. And so they work through that coursework for the remaining year and a half of their undergraduate degree. And that's where we really become familiar with them, familiar with their work. We help guide them through the process. And then we have, just because of the demands of the classroom and the needs for teachers in the classroom, we have, along with the state of Tennessee, agreed to other pathways into the classroom. So some of our students are more traditional in that they finish their undergraduate, they go for a 5th year and do a full year internship. I'm a product of that as well. And as part of that internship year, they'll receive a master's degree with some additional coursework. So we have a considerable amount of students going in with master's degrees. We also have some undergraduate programs where they can be licensed right out of their undergraduate degree. Our Vols Teach program is an example of that. That would be our science and math secondary ed, mainly because there is such a need for science and math in the 6th through 12th grades. So they will do some student teaching during their undergraduate, and that's a very busy season for those students, kind of juggling the undergraduate coursework while being in the classroom teaching. And then we have our job embedded program now, where we have postbacks come to us who maybe never considered teaching. It could be a second career for them, and they come to us and say, I'd like to teach. I've worked with a few that have actually been out in Oak Ridge working in the labs for 20 plus years. And they come back and say, I'd like to teach. I've been able to dabble in a little adult learning, and maybe they facilitated professional developments during their first career. And now they want to go in the classroom and share their experience. And so that's an opportunity and a pathway for those folks to go right into the classroom from day one, be the teacher of record. So their mentor program looks a little different in that they're other teachers in the building mentoring them rather than being right in the classroom with them. And they're paid from day one. And then we as faculty at the university support them through coursework that they take, and then support them by coming in and doing observations. So we've got quite a few options. I think oftentimes folks that are not involved in that process don't realize that it is quite layered and complex. So we do a lot on our end to make sure we're putting the very best in our K-12 classrooms.
So we're hearing a lot in both, I think, local and state and probably national media outlets about future educators and sort of the market for educators right now. What trends are you sort of broadly seeing at UT? What is it like now compared to 5 years ago? Is one of those pathways becoming more popular or more accessible? I mean, what does it look like now in terms of people going into education?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question because we're certainly seeing those patterns and the impact they're having on the pathways that our students are choosing. Um, I would imagine 5 years ago, our 5-year program was the most popular. It's
Hmm.
probably a terrible way to say it, but it was the most preferred options. The idea of gaining a master's degree as part of our program was really attractive to students. Um, I would see the tables are kind of turning there, and now our JEP or our job embedded program is becoming the preferred pathway for a lot of our students. And I think that's because they can walk right into the classroom from day one and be that teacher of record without having to, that internship year is a non-paid internship, and students are actually paying for coursework during that time. So if you have the option, a lot of people are preferring to go in and make a paycheck from day one and then still take the coursework while they're doing, while they're teaching. So the trends would be that we certainly are seeing more limited enrollment into teacher ed. Um, you know, the pandemic has not helped in terms of the demands that have been placed on teachers and the expectations. And we have, I would imagine nationally, if, you know, this is just my opinion, and of course, some of the things I've read have led me to believe that a considerable amount of our teachers who are leaving the classroom are leaving because the demands have been so great and the expectations have been so high. So we are seeing those trends both locally, but our trends locally align very much with the national trends of students choosing other things to do rather than go into teaching, and those that are going into teaching not staying very long. So our job, of course, is to make sure that we are providing pathways in order to retain those teachers longer than the 1 or 2 years that a lot of the data is showing.
Hmm. So if a lot of folks are shifting now to these job embedded placements, are those almost universally people who have a career elsewhere, or are you seeing some students say, well, I'll get my history major, my political science major, take a year off and come back and get paid from day one to be a teacher,
Yeah,
or a mix
I,
of the two?
I think it's a combination of different types of students. For instance, I teach a couple undergraduate courses, and one of the courses I teach, I have every licensure area come through. So even though I'm STEM, I could have art students in there and social sciences or English students in there. And there are already a couple of the undergraduates who recognize that that's an option.
Hmm.
And so their plan is to finish their undergraduate, which qualifies them for teaching. It doesn't provide them with a license, but they have at least the content knowledge. And then if they find a position, usually these are positions in school districts or particular schools that have high turnover rates. And so they're in a kind of a partnership with us at the university. And if that school needs a position and they hire this person, then they get to teach from day one, and we step in to support that their efforts towards licensure. So they'll complete coursework with us. At the same time, their school is stepping in and doing mentorship. And throughout their coursework, it's typically 2 to 3 years that our job embedded students will stay with us as they're teaching. And in the end, they'll obtain a teaching license. So they are put on an apprentice license while they're teaching, and then they'll transition to a professional license once they complete the coursework with us.
So the mechanics are one thing, but you sort of alluded to some barriers, and I think we all know the pandemic, and I'll just say sort of the weight put on a lot of educators to continue teaching and to try to do that in crisis mode for 18 months or so or longer. has taken a toll. I think, once again, that's a national story, but with local consequences. And I wonder how, apart from that, which we have very little control over, obviously, are there other barriers that you think are preventing people who would be interested in teaching, very good at teaching, excellent additions to the school system, from making that step? What else is going on? Because I've been I suspect that the pandemic is the big thing, but there was already, before the pandemic, some of the strain and some of the numbers of people going into this area were starting to decline somewhat.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the pandemic just it just added another layer to some already pretty challenging barriers that existed. I would say if I came across a student, and I often will, throughout certain courses that I take that aren't maybe labeled education or are out there. I teach some graduate courses that are out there, tend to draw a lot of educators, but it's not just solely for education. I'll talk to students who are fantastic, and I'm like, you have great ideas and you'd be wonderful in the classroom. And usually one of the reasons that they choose to go a different direction is because they can make more money going a different direction. And so I would say in that instance, one of the barriers is just salary, and just looking at it from a financial standpoint of, I can go and be a teacher and make X amount of dollars, or I could go, let's say if they have a science degree, I can go over to ORNL and either be in a scientist role or some sort of facilitator over there and make double the money. So that's certainly one barrier. I think sometimes that tends to be a barrier for teachers that are already in the classroom. They go in with this passion and desire to teach, and then their salary is not sustainable for having a family, maybe something they didn't consider when they first walked into the profession, but just those challenges financially that may have them choose to do something else. So I think that's a barrier. That's certainly not a barrier that's new. That's something that constantly is brought up with teaching, is being paid based on our education. I mean, I mentioned earlier, a lot of our students leave UT with a master's degree. And so, that salary then should be reflective of the education and investment and efforts that those students should have put in. In terms of students or teachers who are already in the classroom, I would say, and probably the biggest barrier I've seen is just the culture of the classroom. I've seen where cultures are really positive and supportive and morale is high in certain schools, and I've seen it on the other end of the spectrum. I also have the privilege in my position to do a lot of intern observations in person. And so I visit a lot of schools in our area. And so I see both sides. I could walk into a school and say, gosh, I wish I could teach here. This is a great place to teach. Teachers are supported. They're consulted. They're asked for their opinion. They're involved in conversations rather than just kind of, dictated to, like, here's what we're going to do, without any true explanation as to why. So I just, valuing teachers is really critical. Valuing the expertise they bring in, valuing what they do in the classroom with students, valuing the idea that they know their students better than people who are not in those classrooms with them, and recognizing that. And again, involving them in conversations and decisions. And I think that helps with attrition. If you've got happy employees, they're going to want to stay. And with happy employees also come very successful students as well. So they're all interconnected. And I think if we can figure out a way for our teachers to feel valued, then we can also kind of at least decrease, if not strip away, some of that barrier that exists within the culture of our schools. And for me, And my experiences, I found that that can be directly correlated to leadership within the school. What are the administrations, what is your leadership doing to help support teachers, make them feel seen and make them feel valued?
Well, that sort of leads me kind of naturally to my next question. These are all really interesting big picture sort of questions about how people come into the profession, how they're supported in the profession. We could talk about the fact that there, there's a challenge at recruiting. I think you put your finger on this. How do you recruit STEM teachers when the market can offer them more than the school systems almost anywhere can? And teachers are very, very familiar with this refrain, but teaching is a vocation, which it is. I absolutely believe that. But a vocation can also cover up not being paid what you're worth as well. And so I appreciate you sort of raising those issues to the forefront. But for just from a really practical perspective, what can a school board do at the end of the day? Because that, to my mind, the next Board of Education, for Knox County at least, is going to be tasked with figuring out how to address a crisis that isn't going to go away anytime soon in terms of staffing. And at the very least, it would be helpful to know what not to do to try to address that crisis. It would be fantastic to know what we practically could do.
Yeah. Gosh, we could be here all day probably talking about this. One of the things I think would be helpful, and I've seen this work successfully both in our local district and some surrounding districts, is and I kind of go back to my answer from our previous discussion, in that why not involve teachers in the conversation? You're doing this just with us sitting down, but like listening to teachers. What are the challenges and barriers that they're facing? I think it's important for the Board of Education to not assume that they know what's going on inside those classrooms, even if they're frequenting those schools. Oftentimes when, the BOE member comes in, the red carpet's rolled out, or, an email sent to all the teachers, so-and-so is going to be here today, our BOE member, and everybody's on great behavior, or whatever those things are. But just to come in and talk to teachers, how's it going this week? What are the challenges you're facing? What are ways we can support you? Because that's how I view our BOE. It's a group of elected officials who are there to serve our teachers, our students, our staff, our administrators. And it's hard to know how to serve unless you know what needs to be done. And so, in order to figure that out, you've got to talk to teachers, you've got to talk to administrators, talk to students, talk to parents. What is it that's going on? There's a lot of different stakeholders there. I have found that to work really successfully with some BOE members. And then we have some, I feel, that are often talking to one of those groups of stakeholders. Maybe the parents are easier to access, but not really getting into the trenches. I mean, your students and your teachers know more about what's going on in those buildings. And so just listening to them and talking to them. I think too, as I said before, a lot of what happens culturally in that school can be at the hands of the leadership in the building, and maybe the leadership even at the district level, and just helping support that leadership so that the type of culture that these teachers need and want can be modeled appropriately. We have some really great administrators in our local district. And so just figuring out what is it they're doing that is working so well for their school, for their students, for their teachers, and really making that a model of here's what we need to be doing for our teachers. So I think you're starting great in terms of just listening to what teachers need, what students need, and then going from there. It's kind of a daunting job to think of what can you do at the BOE level to kind of slow this this crisis, if you will, of teachers leaving the classroom. But I think it's certainly an important one, and I feel strongly in that our BOE members have a responsibility to serve our students and our teachers. And so again, I probably could keep going on and on, but I will slow there and just say I think it's just a matter of talking to them and making sure they're a part of the conversation.
I do think that conversation is important. It's time consuming, and it requires really listening to people. And I'll just sort of finish with the story from last night. My youngest is heading to middle school next year, and we went to an open house night for middle school last night. And you're walking around, you're talking to all the teachers, and one of the teachers mentioned to me, she said, it's strange because now I'm teaching with students who I taught when they were here in middle school. And, we were talking about that and what that's like. But as I reflected on it later, I thought, what a powerful testimony to the importance of teachers, that you have students who look at what you do, what you've done for them, and they want to come back and be part of that, not just in general, but they want to be part of where you taught. I mean, that to me is a goal which, all of us who teach might want to aspire for. But that's the kind of investment in students that our teachers always make. And I think you're absolutely right. The more that we can find ways to invest in them, not just in terms of money, which is always a good thing, but in creating a professional environment for them and respecting their expertise and seeing them as part of a team. I think you're absolutely correct that sometimes there can be conflict and necessary conflict between different stakeholders. That's living in society, right? But the more we can work together, I think the better off we are. So thank you for what you're doing to prepare future teachers for Knox County schools, for sure, and for other places around the world and around the state. And thanks for talking to me today about where we are in teacher education.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for chatting with me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Dr. MacTavish.